The Dearborn Independent, Chronicler of the Neglected Truth, January 22nd, 1927, Volume 27, Number 12. Average as the goal of education. Shall school children be taught that getting by is their chief aim? Not long ago, at a dinner, I compared notes with half a dozen parents on that most important and most interesting of all subjects, our children. In a moment or two, we were sitting as a committee of the whole to consider the state of the nation with special reference to our children. All the youngsters brought into the picture were between 6 and 14 years old. Some were boys and some were girls. One curious fact stood out. Every child above the age of 12 had during the summer been in one of the camps, which are run by teachers assisted by young college men and women, and are a cross between a summer continuation school and a recreation camp. These camps are not cheap, and as a rule, they're excellently run. The children learn swimming and certain amounts of woodcraft, and also they're taught to take care of themselves. There is something of the fun of outdoors, the real outdoors away from the roads. These camps, remarked one of the women, must be growing into the great industry, for I noticed that nearly all of the department stores now have special camp outfitting sections, and every one that I went into was doing a rushing business. People must have a great deal of money for it, rather pinched as to send our children away. Why did you send your children away? I asked. For I knew that scarcely anyone at the table could really afford to spend the money. Oh, the children wanted to go very much, she answered, for all their friends were going, and it was nice to think that they could learn to swim well and to ride well and to learn to do a lot of things that I didn't have a chance to do when I was a girl. And then, too, we never know exactly what to do with them in the summer when they're not going to school. They get tired of everything and become nuisance to themselves and everybody else. It seems a dreadful thing to say, but I think I was glad to get rid of them for a little while. I suppose we're not like the old mothers who were willing to live for their children. And thus, the ice being broken, it came out that all these children had gone to camp as much for the good of their parents as for the good of themselves. As another woman admitted, there is nothing bad about my children, but they do get on my nerves, and then I scold them, and I don't want them to think of me only as a person who scolds. Now, these were not fightly people trying to be fashionable. They were just good citizens of moderate income, which they earned by their own efforts. They represented a fair cross-section of the kind of people whom you can find in any town or city of the country. And yet they admitted that they were handing over the most critical part of the training of their children. But they were not doing it with their eyes shut, but as came out in the conversation, because they thought the children paid more attention to what the teacher said than to what they said. They did not know whether the fault was with the children or with themselves, but they were frank enough to admit that they saw less of their children after 7 or 8 years old of age than did the school and camp instructors. Perhaps this is as it should be, for it by no means follows that fathers and mothers, by acquiring the status of parenthood, also acquire a knowledge of how to train children. The superiority of the parent over the child is often only physical, the family to give the child a liking. A child is directed to honor his father and mother. Yet, if we take this In its literal application, it is putting a duty on the child without any corresponding duties on the parents, so to act that they may be worthy of honor. Those of us who are parents know that often we must unfairly punish children merely for showing the same faults that we have. It is impossible to maintain the glorified parent attitude without being a good deal of a hypocrite or an adept of self-deception. I often wonder if our ancestors could have gotten away with as much as they did had they not lurked behind long, flowing beards. One day, my boy brought in his school report saying self-satisfiedly, "Well, I got average." "What do you mean average?" I asked. "Oh, we have a new kind of report now. We're just marked on whether we're above the average of the class instead of getting regular marks." I looked at the report. It was a formidable document of 4 pages. The first page had to do only with the school subject, but then followed 31 divisions which were headed Habits and Attitude Desirable for Good Citizenship. These divisions are interesting. The points they give importance to may be good. Certainly they're not bad. But what is their real importance? And what is their trend? Here are the points. Personal habits. Stand on 2 feet without leaning. Sits back in chair with feet on floor. Keeps hands and materials away from mouth and fingers away from nose and ears. Keeps desk, table, and locker in good order. Does not waste, destroy, or lose paper, pencil, books, homework, or other materials. Is in the right place at the right time, equipped for work. Anticipates his needs and does not borrow. Responds to directions or requests quickly and without unnecessary discussions. Social habits. Is trustworthy in obeying rules governing halls, recess, fire drills, and study periods. Respects school property, doing his part to keep desks and walls free from defacing marks. Cooperates in keeping school building in good order. Respects authority. Refrains from unnecessary talking in assembly during study hours and between periods. Uses quiet tone in corridors, lunchrooms, and in classrooms before and after school. Claims no more than his fair share of time and attention, particularly in the recreation period. Is attentive when someone else is talking. Does not interrupt others needlessly. Is straightforward in all his dealings with others. Is polite in speech, manner, and attitude. Knows how to get along with others. Performs satisfactorily the duties of any office to which he is elected. Work and study habits. Uses time to good advantage. Does good work day by day. Hands work in on time. Concentrates upon the task at hand. Perseveres in spite of difficulty. Is accurate in his work. Is trustworthy in performing tasks independently. Finds ways and means of improving weak points and of making up work missed. Does not play with pencil, paper, and so forth in recreation period. Volunteers in the recreation, doing his part to make it profitable and interesting. And then I put in a few days thinking about that report. It bothered me from several angles. Putting up average as a goal was almost terrifying. Were the children being taught that it was enough just to get by? The report had this explanation of what meant by average. This report is a record of actual achievement, not of achievement relative to the pupil's ability. Average indicates the achievement of a middle half of the representative class. It signifies satisfactory work in the class of a pupil of average ability. Above average indicates the achievement of approximately the upper fourth of the class. This mark signifies excellent work. Below average indicates the achievement of approximately the lowest fourth of the class. It signifies mediocre or poor work. Failure indicates that the pupil has not reached the required passing mark. The use of average as qualified but the explanation was not unreasonable. But that was not the effect on my boy. He was content that he was no worse than most of his class. And what was that class as compared with the world which he would someday have to meet? And then the habit report. Would he gain the notion that good citizenship could be so easily defined and was so superficial? I couldn't keep my thoughts to myself. I had to write them to the school. Dear Mr. Maddox, I have been a long time returning this report because I so thoroughly disagree with its whole concept that I have felt I should write to you rather fully. This thing of taking an average on utterly insufficient data and then assuming that the average is a desirable point from which to begin measurement, whether physical or mental, tends towards a leveling downward and is in opposition to the development of individuality and the advancement of society. Statistics, and they are nearly all pseudostatistics, are doing an immense amount of harm today because they fall into the hands of ingenious, hardworking people who take them as facts rather than as an indication. And I know nothing more dangerous than a resolute person armed with a fact which is not a fact. All this average stuff, including this test, so quaintly called intelligence test, may be of some use in a rough and ready separation of great masses of people, although I imagine that quite as good result in such a separation might be attained by some purely arbitrary standard, such as comparing the length of the left ear with that of the right toe. I do not know what the resulting figure would mean, but that would rather be an advantage, because I would not pretend to, while the averages set out in this report pretended to mean something, but actually they mean nothing. Now, to be specific, the report falls into two divisions, the first called the academic report and the second the habit report. Let us first have a look at the academic report. This report tells me nothing. I want to know what Putnam is doing. I have not the remotest interest in what he is doing as compared with the other members of his class or as compared with what is called a representative class. I do not know what a representative class is, and I doubt if the Lord has ever confined that information to anyone. The object of a school is to develop the pupil according to his individuality. If no one in Putnam's class has any knowledge of reading, composition, or language, then Putnam naturally must be marked average in these subjects. And I think this must be the case because he knows nothing at all about them. In fact, I cannot discover that he knows anything or is learning anything. Any worse than that, I cannot discover that he is interested in learning anything. There is something very wrong indeed with the methods being pursued, and I have a suspicion that the trouble lies in relating the work to a mythical average instead of to a standard of actual accomplishment. With the small classes which you have, no pupil should be deficient in any subject. If he is deficient, then that is the fault of the teaching and not of the pupil. A report given to parents should not be an account of what the pupil has done. It should be an account of what the school has done. The burden of proof is on the school, not the pupil. Of course, the ultimate of education is to start the thought process. We must distinguish between memory and intelligence, but no one can be taught to think. The most that teaching can do is to awaken the mind of the pupil to reasoning and then give them some tools to reason with. Putnam is not getting those tools. And the second section of the report uncovers a fondness of the lockstep, which is inimical with thought. Now take the second section, the habit report. This is ambitiously headed, Habits and Attitudes Desirable for Good Citizenship. Who determined that? Let us take some of the specific headings. Stand on 2 feet without leaning. I should like to know who determined that standing on 2 foot was incompatible with good citizenship. That standing on 1 foot was incompatible with good citizenship. Has anyone made the rather laborious research to determine the relation between the full service of citizenship and the position of one's feet? If absolute conclusions have been arrived at, it seems to me this should be put on the agenda of the League of Nations. For them, we could get at the troubles of the world through its feet. Personally, I never use 2 feet if 1 foot can be made to serve. I cannot think of any single class of people that constantly uses 2 feet, other than the army. And I do not know that the contributions of the army to the intelligence of the country has been significant. Of course, if a pupil took to standing on his head, that would be another matter. Anticipates his needs and does not borrow. A much higher grade of intelligence would be indicated by a pupil anticipating his needs and borrowing. Respect authority. The whole progress of our race has been based not on respecting authority as such, but upon respecting authority according to the righteousness of its genesis. Respecting authority because it is authority as Teutonic. Is attentive when someone else is talking. There is nothing to this. The real point is to discover what is someone else is talking about, and then instantly to determine whether it is worth listening to. Most of these headings have nothing in particular to do with good citizenship or anything else. But if we should assume for the moment that all of the headings were right, or that any list could be drawn and that an analysis of this sort was needed, then I cannot see how it is possible for any teacher accurately to make this elaborate diagnosis, even for 1 pupil, let alone for the class. I have never been able to agree with flippant characterization such as may be found, for instance, in reference blanks sent out by employment agencies. It is not possible to dissect the intricate intellectual elements which go to make up the mind of a human being and then quickly mark them as positive or negative. It is done, and it is done with great self-sufficiency. But to be able to do it is not an indication of keen observation. It is an indication that the observer is not really an observer at all, but has a mind filled with slogans instead of a mind filled with thoughts. If you're delegating the education of your children, and in part you must, to what sort of notion are you exposing them? It might pay to find out. No, I didn't get a reply. I withdrew the boy from the school. If we're handing over so much of the training of our children to school instructors, what are we doing about the instructors? First, are the instructors capable of sizing up to the job that has been handed to them? And second, about what are they instructing? No expense is spared in equipment, and there are no end of capable, conscious instructors in the elementary school, which are the school which count most. But also there's a growing class which considers the teaching merely a job. For instance, some teachers are active in the organizing of trade union among themselves, not at all at the purpose of becoming better teachers, but for the purpose of forcing more pay out of their jobs. Perhaps teachers are not paid enough. Probably they're not, considering the importance of teaching duties and the need for the single-minded application to them. That is a matter to be gone into from educational rather from the political side. But what are they teaching?